it's the last day of the Bonza Rally.
Rally Road Racers came out in the summer of 2023. Now, you might not have seen it because it came out after Mario Brothers, but before Spider-Verse. It's about Z, a rookie race car driver who gets the opportunity to compete against the reigning champion of the rally car circuit, the Silk Road Rally. With help from a former driver turned mechanic, Z has to overcome treacherous terrain, rival racers, and unexpected obstacles to prove he has what it takes to be the next great racer.
You're the one who's supposed to be doing the beating of me?
Written and directed by my friend Ross Van Oker, this was his first animated feature-length film, and it was made independently for a budget of about $13 million over the course of 4 years. And we've been kindly given the rights to create some of these models in 3D AI Studio. Welcome back to our second tutorial. I'd just like to share that this is a piece of marketing artwork I created for Rally Road Racers. It was seen on social media and elsewhere. Let's meet the characters that we're going to be creating using 3D AI Studio. That's Z on the left, and that's Shelby on the right. Z is the full triumphant, and Shelby is the really cool racing gal that gives him the inspiration to race. So she has a lot of very cool details that we're going to be keying in on, like that really cool hairstyle and the clothes that she's wearing, like that cool leather jacket. There's a little composition I drew up in the right-hand corner, and there's the helmet that we're going to take a look at in 3D AI Studio. In the end, I believe that we left it off, but I think that it's still really cool to see how we can test a concept very quickly using 3D AI Studio. So here is a cool rendering of the motorcycle that we're going to be modeling. There's a rendering of it over there on the left as well in side view, and here's a sketch in side view that we're going to be using. There is a cool painting that we're going to be using for color reference. We're going to put that in 3D AI Studio and get an output from that. I'm also going to be loading this image for Texture AI Generator so we can get that leather jacket texture right onto the model without having to paint anything. Over here, we have all the orthographic views that you guys are going to be inputting into 3D AI Studio. There's Z up at the top. Those are some rough sketches. And here is a turnaround for Shelby as well. And we're going to be inputting those into image to 3D. The stated goal of this tutorial is to get some really interesting concept artwork that we can use as a proof of concept for a YouTube series for Rally Road Racers. So without further ado, let's input all of our images for Shelby and see what we come out with there, the settings there on the right. And what we get is a pretty decent result for a blocking model. I just need the proportions of things, and it doesn't matter if the model didn't completely generate in that area properly. I'm going to refine it. Here's another version of the model with slightly different settings, but nonetheless, we have exactly what we need in terms of knowing the proportions, the silhouettes, the blockings, where certain details go. Even if those details didn't come in exactly correct, remember, I have the concept artwork. In 2D, let's crop the head off and generate as well. And we got some more detail coming in on that head, which is great for me. And here is Z. He came out pretty decently, I thought. The nose area and the muzzle area needs some refinement, but there's another model there with different settings, and we can Frankenstein these together. And there's just the head, which I thought came out pretty decent. In fact, it didn't change too much from that. And there is a screenshot from the film that I've essentially generated in 3D to get color. And there is that 2D color reference we mentioned earlier. And there is just another image from the film that I'm going to be using later on to pose Shelby. There's the motorcycles block in that we took from that 2D side view image and just straightly inputted it in, and there we go. So I'm going to use all those generated models raw to give myself a pre-visualization of what I want to create in 3D space here inside ZBrush. Next, we're going to start with the motorcycle and bring that into Gravity Sketch for modeling and greater refinement. So there I've put in the 2D image there on a flat plane, and there's the model from 3D AI Studio. And I'm going to go ahead and just get an idea what it feels like to be on this model, making sure that the character can actually reach those handlebars. There's the character on the left, there's Z. And I'm going to make sure that I have clearance there on the ground. And I probably might need to lower that front wheel, but perhaps not. I've actually taken off my goggles there to check something. That's a pass-through mode where I can see the real world while I'm still here in Gravity Sketch. I'm not going to show you the entire process, but I'm going to show you part of it. So there I go, pulling out my character lines and refining the form. And what I'll be doing is using those lines and essentially bridging between those lines geometry And those are the character lines that I see there in the 2D sketch. But the 3D sketch is what's driving it because those points are snapping in 3D space to that model. And I like to think of it like I'm working with scan data. We deal with a lot of scan data all the time. But what this allows me to do is generate my own scan data and refine it from there. So as you can see, this is an assistive tool that helps me either decide to go with what's there or change my mind because certain things just won't work either in 2D and 3D. And it's your job as the designer to sort of figure out and make these things work. And the great part of it is that, we're using all these tools together, the new and the old. And nothing is being thrown out. And recently I've actually watched a special on the creation of The Mandalorian, and it's amazing to see that Phil Tippett's stop motion is still being used in The Mandalorian. They did the walkers, I think, on one of the planets there, and they've used practical effects and CG effects. Even in the new Indiana Jones, they use them all together, the AI deep fake replacement there for Harrison Ford's face. But I digress. As you can see here, I'm blocking out all of the major elements using the Revolve tool in Gravity Sketch. And I really highly recommend you guys watch tutorials in Gravity Sketch. The Gravity Sketch is free for the most part. If you want a plan with Gravity Sketch to hold more data on their server and have more people in your collab room, they have various price points for those. So here I go. I'm essentially continuing my modeling process using just the sketching tools. I'm blocking out the handlebars and blocking out some of the exhaust pipes and the exhaust system there. And it's really easy to do that in VR space. I get a greater sense for how things relate to each other in 3D space, and bringing in my 3D AI Studio model raw, I can do that. So here I'm going to model the front forks, but I'm going to realize that there's a really easy way to adapt and get a little bit ahead of the process. I can bring in a template that ships free with Gravity Sketch. It's the motorcycle template, which you'll see me bring up here in a moment. But as you can see, I'm going through a little bit of trial and error to figure out the best way that I want to do this. And it's nice to have not just your 2D, but your 3D as well, right there in the viewport. And it just, makes the process a little bit easier and allows me to think about problem solving a little bit more efficiently. I do sincerely recommend you guys check out their template folder that ships free with Gravity Sketch. And you just choose the motorcycle template. You can bring it in and even choose its scale. And I did. I adjusted its scale to fit my character. And the great thing about working this way, you guys should know, I've worked in real scale on this model in all the projects that you've seen throughout the entire time. I think it's important to do that when you're working with a group or a team, because scale is everything. And I think that people overlook that fact. Even in traditional projects, we always check our scale first before we start even cutting a single piece of wood. So there I go. I'm going to put this in the right positions of where I think it should go. And I'm going to be essentially putting it exactly where 3D AI thought it should go. And it made a lot of sense. And then I adjusted it just a little bit. I recently did a pro project for Maxon with Scott Robertson, and I started with a Gravity Sketch because I think that it enabled me to figure out the volumes and the placement of certain key features and character lines that I needed, and work out and resolve certain things in real time as I would in the real world. And I did it in virtual space, which was quite nice. Saved a lot of time. I could even ask questions. They even have a laser pointer tool, so you can record, ask questions, and send them to your friend right to their WhatsApp from VR space. I'm using I think this is this is a MetaQuest Pro. The new MetaQuest, I think the MetaQuest 3 that came out is pretty powerful, and I'd recommend everybody go pick one up. It's very inexpensive to get started using VR. And there I go. I'm building the block plate that sits behind the forks. I brought this all back into ZBrush and used some of the features that they have there to make this go a little bit better for me and a bit quicker. Specifically, we'll take a look at that after I'm done with my block in Gravity Sketch. Again, certain things are easier done in other packages than Gravity Sketch, and certain things are not. Like if you want to push a hole through a model, very, very hard to do that in Gravity Sketch. Once you have all your topology figured out, it becomes like weaving. So there's my finished block in model that I've done. and we're going to take a look at the 3D AI studio model and compare it. So let's just move it aside there. And I'm going to turn on the opacity of that layer. So we're going to see that as well. And we can compare it. And here we are back in ZBrush, exported from my headset directly to the iPad. And there we go. So you guys can see the comparison. All of the volumes are correct, but certain details I went in there and made decisions on, like the foot pegs and the engine block. And here we go. I'm going to put the treads in. So I modeled this in ZBrush using a very cool, and it ships with ZBrush. It's an insert IMM curve brush that I essentially ran along and then used an array mesh to array it around that wheel, and then used the live Boolean system, created a start process for the wheel and a subtraction for the subtools of the treads, and cut right into it. And then you can actually process that Boolean right onto that surface, then remesh from there, or however you want to process it. There's the headlamp on the front of the bike. There's some of the engine block, and there's some of the different parts of the engine, and there's the brakes. As you can see, that's a live Boolean and then remeshed. And I was pretty pleased with the way this came out and the process that this took. And there are some of the materials that I've laid on there from Redshift. I've decided to keep this tutorial a little bit briefer and just only model Shelby all the way through on camera. And then the other character, Z, we're just going to highlight what's different about him, but they all follow the same process. So I'm bringing together all my models, and we're going to Frankenstein them together. We're going to start with the head of Shelby, and then we're going to make our way down through the body. But we're going to take little pauses and first just focus in on the head. So there's the head from 3D AI. And what I'm going to use is Sculptress Pro with the smooth tool activated, and just start to pull all of my data away from there. I want to give her a nice round head, or just finish out the skull. I'm going to turn off my poly paint information and essentially just start to pull down that, start to melt this model away essentially. I have to be careful not to get into the way of the face there. But yeah, I'm starting to refine and pull out all these details. I'm just going to clip away what I don't need using the clip knife tool that you guys can find there. Believe you're going to hold down the masking button, and I think it's Command Shift. So this is the masking and the smoothing button on iPad, and you'll see at the bottom will appear the menu. So here I'm just smoothing this out using dynamic tessellation provided by Sculptress Pro. And there we go. I'm going to duplicate that model out. I'm going to do that several times. I'm going to duplicate and delete. So essentially every single feature, I'm just going to start with the head as a whole, and then just focus in on the features that I need, like ears or eyes or nose or hair. So here I'm just going to chop off the hair, and it goes pretty quickly from there. I'm going to just decimate it down a little bit so I don't have to deal with such a dense model. And it's important to keep your topology clean as best you can. You got to weld points on any model you bring in from 3D AI Studio. I can't emphasize that enough. And I'm projecting down any texture as poly paint. So there we go. I have the hair, and the hair is turning out quite nicely as a block in. So this is great because at any point in the process, I can stop and show it to somebody. And that's why you can see the advantages of using 3D AI generative technology within your 3D model, because you're still having to go in there, refine it, and make all those decisions if something didn't come out right. And you're still in control. And there we go. I put the hair right into the block out of the head without the hair on it. So there I go. I'm going to go for the ears now. I'm just going to go for one ear, and I'm going to slice away or hide away anything that I can do to get just that ear on its own. And we're going to actually retopologize that ear, of course, as we will with everything else. So there I go. I've isolated the ear. I'm going to mirror it to the other side, mirror and weld it to the other side. They're on one subtool. And now I think we're going to also start thinking about how to round out that head a bit more. And let's go ahead here and just put the hair back on. And I'm going to clear out those eyelids, clear out any geometry that's there. And the great thing about Sculptress Pro, it'll just melt it away. Melt it all the way to nothing. We're going to replace those eyelids here in just a minute, but I'm going to just put everything back in its place to try to calm down all the vertices and create a nice smooth mesh, which I'll then go ahead and remesh. So from here, I'm going to mask the eyelid area and smooth it out a bit and get rid of any unnecessary holes, close them up, and try to make this thing as clean as possible for a good remesh. When I do the remesh, I'm going to make sure that I can project all my details down and start the sculpting process and make that as efficient as possible. From there, I'm going to smooth out everything, try to get a nice clean surface. Again, lots of projection, lots of different little things just to get those details in the right place. So when I go in and model them, we'll get a lot greater accuracy. So for here, I'm going to put the eyeballs in. So the reason that there are poles on there is by default, the sphere, when you use the gizmo, click on the golden gear and select the sphere primitive, it gives you a pole like that. You can stretch out the cone and get rid of that pole. But in our case, we want to keep that pole because we're going to be using ZModeler and creating some irises in there. I'm going to skip a lot of the form building sculpting because it's not as interesting to watch. But here I'm smoothing everything out, and I'm going to be sculpting in the mouth details. I do apologize if it tends to look like Voldemort. So now we're going to be adding in the eyelids. The eyelids are just simple spheres that I'm going to be using the clip curves brush. Just like the knife tool, you can access it using the masking and smoothing brush or on your Mac or PC, holding down Control and Shift or Command and Shift on a Mac. Here I've added the cube that I'm going to be using to model my nose. It's a very, very cute little nose we're going to model here, I must say. And we're going to be using dynamic symmetry here, where you set the transform gizmo and it gives you the axis of symmetry based on where the gizmo is. And you can activate that by, you see the butterflies over there on the right-hand side. You just hold down where it says D and you choose dynamic as opposed to local symmetry. I use this quite often. And the reason being is that sometimes I want, symmetry in a very specific place that may not align with the world axis. So here we go. And that looks pretty complete. It's like, right before we put her in the makeup chair, we're going to do everything else here. So here, because it's a sculpt at the end of the day, my plan was to 3D print this with my friend Mo Langerman. He has a very powerful, cool resin printer that we're going to be testing out. I wanted to model in some of the graphic details of the eye socket and the brow area together. And as you see here, I'm just using the extrude edge feature. And we're going to be mirroring that to the other side, moving it over just slightly. And again, we're going to be using the move snap to surface feature in ZModeler. And ZModeler has shipped at this point with ZBrush for iPad and ZBrush for desktop. It's been there for quite a while. I don't know if you've noticed, but the ZModeler brush has presets that you can set up yourself depending on whatever you use. And you just long press on the buttons on the left when the ZModeler brush comes up. And you can choose different types of poly actions with their targets, and even select a temporary poly group. That's the 3 hexagons next to each other. And over here, now you can see I'm modeling in the eyebrows. I tend to use dynamic thickness a lot on just about everything in this model, mainly because I don't want to babysit geometry on the inside of the model. And I just find that dynamic thickness does such a great job. And there I'm giving her a unibrow and then deleting the polygon in between that unibrow. And now I'm going to be using dynamic thickness again on the eyelashes. Here it's just going to be a flat plane. I'm not going to actually, give her real physical eyelashes like I would with another model or use a fur system. In fact, I did not use a fur system at all on this model like as seen in the film, mainly because it's going to be 3D printed and I wanted it to appear as smooth as possible, because if we ever go into production on toys of these things from these models, I want them to be able to have nice clean surfaces, which will make the cleanup work on any 3D print much easier. So I'm going to mirror over the eyelashes. I think overall it's looking pretty good. I'm going to give myself some last looks here as I pull away. But all that's left to model from this point out is the ear. And 3D AI Studio did such a great job in generating it that all I might do is adjust some of the hard surfaces in there and some of the weighting of those edges. But again, my technique won't change from here. I'm going to treat it like a scanned model, but I'm also going to make those corrections that I want to see in the concept itself by, as I said before, adding creased edges to any of those surfaces that I feel need to be sharp or soft. And I'm even going to do some light painting on it just to give myself a heads up for what we're going to be doing when we do rendering. If we're going to put some subsurface scattering in there, I'm going to have a lighter shade of pink for the inside of the ear. So as you can see, it's a very quick process, and there's the finished model, there's the scan data, and there's some loose poly paint. Okay, so I'm going to be closing the gaps. I'm sure that Mo is really going to close everything once he gets these models. So now I'm going to be using an IMM Curves brush. I found this one online for free. That's pretty cool. I'll put the link in the description. ZBrush has a very elegant IMM Curves brush here that you can tell it in the curves stroke settings that you want it to snap to the surface, or you want it to bend at the start or bend at the end. It's extremely powerful, this system. And after you've done and committed yourself to the curve, you can use deformers or the Move topological brush, anything to get it in place. So I'm going to jump ahead to the finished placement of all of the hair strands. It's really nice that 3D AI Studio gives me a good block in that I can follow and deviate from as I need. So now I'm going to be doing the fun part of this, which is the earrings. And I'm going to be using the Boolean features here, the live Boolean features. And there I go. I punched in a cylinder into the ear. And we're going to add in some toruses there for the loops of the earrings. And if I wanted to, I could use those same toruses to punch holes, but I figured nobody will see it, nobody will care. But this piece over here, I'm going to model up, and I'm going to put a nice front and back on it and give it a good material. So there I punched through there with the Q Mesh flat island. And there we have the fronts and backs of that piercing. I'm going to align it up a little bit better. And I think that it's working pretty good. All right. Let's now start on the body. So here's that main blocking mesh that we brought in from before. This is directly out of 3D AI Studio. I'm going to cut the head off there just simply by hiding it. So using the gizmo, I'm going to simply summon a cube primitive with about 3-on-3 sides. And I'm going to just sculpt it into place using the Z Modeler brush, using Insert Edge, and just basically modeling it up, pushing points. Nothing to it. I'm also using dynamic subdivisions to give it a smoothing. But essentially, I have that as a guide in there for me, so I can really either choose to deviate or stick. And so far, I'm choosing to stick. I'm going to be modeling that leather jacket separately from the torso. I'm going to model all the torso pieces separately and then unify them together. But for the most part, I try to follow the same method that I would use to model this thing that I would if I didn't have 3D AI Studio. And it just basically gives me a little bit of a help here and makes the creative part fun, because now I'm not thinking about where points necessarily go. I'm thinking about, how do I solve this? How do I get this out? How do I make this work? The belt was super easy to model because all I had to do was extract the polygons from the torso and pull them out a bit. And there we go. Voila, belt. Now we're going to model the lower torso, the legs, and the feet. And I've started just the same way as I did from before, as I've started using a box, using Move topological and clip curves and Z modeler. Just kept it very simple, but I can snap anything I need to that surface. However, the legs were a little bit of a challenge because they were so close together in the model. And if I were to generate this again, maybe I would move the legs a little bit more apart so I'd have an easier time grabbing those polygons. But as you can see, we've made do with the Clip Curves brush and the Select Lasso for masking. And where this technique comes from is an artist named Shane Olson, who I've watched for quite a long time on ZBrush Live. And Shane models very modularly, and it really caused me to change the way that I do things. I used to model everything as a Dynamesh and then retopologize and sculpt, move points endlessly. But this method is actually very similar to drawing, which is why I like it a lot. I do enjoy drawing every day, and I do enjoy applying that same methodology of drawing to my 3D models. And this is really great. This is like having an underlay in 3D. That's the best way I can describe it. You're still doing all that hard work and all that decision making, but again, it's you that guides the process, not it. So here we go. I'm going to be modeling the leather jacket, and I'm going to be starting there with a cylinder, extruding it out, and I'm going to be deleting that face there at the top, creating a hole, and that'll allow me to use dynamic thickness, and that'll allow me to create the sleeve that I need. Now, if this was a production model, I'd model the entire interior torso and body, but since it's not, and I don't have to worry about that, I'm just going to be modeling it for the sake of 3D printing, keeping it simple in case we need to move stuff around or pose things. This is where it becomes really, really good. This way I don't have to rig anything. I can model all the body parts separately and then just pose them together using Transpose Master. I don't show that in this tutorial because it's just a whole bunch of trial and error. So let's move on to the front and back of the jacket. So that was modeled very similar to the way that the chest was modeled. You're going to see I've actually kept it all single-sided and used dynamic thickness and created a little bit of a pattern there at the top. That's really easy using ZModeler and polygroups. See, the polygroups, you can actually run an action on a specific polygroup to do a whole lot of things. And I really recommend you guys deep dive into that. Those were the feet that were modeled and very simply done. There we go. I think that all that's left is the hands. So I didn't really want to have to model hands for this, so I just essentially downloaded some free ones from Sketchfab. So the way that I'm posing those hands is using the Anchors brush. The Anchors brush provides an intuitive way to deform the meshes. It works by applying anchors onto a mesh while allowing for a variety of actions to be performed with or without symmetry. The Anchors brush includes move, rotate together, scale, inflate, and twist and bend. Ian Robinson, a trainer at Maxon, has used that brush the most effective. So here we go. I'm going to be adding the zippers right down the middle. And what I do is I extract from the body a loop of polygons, and I'm going to create alternate rows of polygroups. And then in the stroke palette, I'm going to be using polygroups as a frame for my curve. And I'm going to apply a zippers brush, which ships free with ZBrush. And you just change the scale of the brush and apply it just like that. I'm going to delete the top of the zipper and the bottom of the zipper because I don't need them for this. If I wanted to, I could leave them in there and change their orientation. But there's zippers on the shirt and on the belt independently from one another. And it's so much fun to play with these curve brushes in ZBrush. It just makes things so much easier. Also, a really quick tip, if you want to spiral your curve, you just go to the tip of the curve and hold down the masking brush, and you can actually rotate that curve. Make sure your cursor is blue when you do it. That indicates that you can manipulate the curve, but it's really, really a fun way to do that. I believe make sure bend start is on in your stroke palette. I'm going to use this same method when I run the seam down the arms of the jacket and the seams down the sides of the pants. All right. So this model is looking pretty solid at this point, and we're ready to go to makeup. And there is that gen that we've built in 3D AI Studio on the left to give me color reference in 3D space. So I don't have to pick colors from 2D images or worry about paletization because I have that already built into that other model. So I can just pick those colors and paint them onto my model here on the right. And again, I don't have UVs on any of these models yet, but the great thing about using things in 3D AI Studio is that they give you, I believe it's an Atlas UV shell that works pretty well for the most part. And then you can always project that back onto your geometry in ZBrush and then give yourself some great UVs. So now I don't really want to have to paint and texture the jacket. So I brought that into 3D AI Studio using Texture AI Generator, and it's just wonderful. Gives me a great base by which to start from and gives me all my PBR materials. Now, if I wanted those PBR materials back after my modification, I could run that back through and I could have everything plus the low res mesh that I would either generate here or there. And it all works out pretty good. So here I've transferred all that texture data to PolyPaint, and I'm just fixing up the textures. Now I already have the UVs, so I don't have to go and re-UV the model. I'm going to be using these UVs, which are good enough. I'm going to be baking out the color maps. Other parts of the model, like where those white areas are, I'm going to put a strip of geometry in there with some thickness that will fill it out. There we go, generated my map. Don't have to worry about anything to create from Polypaint. And that was all that it took. In the end, I do go in there and change the leather jacket to being more of a dark brownish color, but I did that using Polypaint Adjust Colors feature, which is just phenomenal in the sense that you don't have to go back and repaint everything. You can actually color correct your Polypaint without UVs. My choice of using ZBrush for iPad is it represents the future of the product's direction in terms of interface. I'm only showing the process for Shelby, but the process for Z was just the same, if not easier. He just had a few more props that needed to be made for him, like his funny helmet that he has. That's a helmet for riding a horse. If you don't know that, that's okay. But nevertheless, the techniques are going to be the exact same here, and you can apply these techniques in any software that you're using, specifically Nomad or Blender or whatever your poison is. Okay, so let's go take a look at Z. So here's Z, and as you can see, his model was done pretty much the same way. I've shared some of the elements like the ears, but here we have the helmet and the strap around the helmet, which I really enjoyed making. The stitching specifically is very cool and intricate. I'm going to show you guys how I made that. It wasn't so dissimilar to the zipper or the pant leg or the stitching on Shelby. As you can see here, I'm a big fan of dynamic thickness wherever I can get away with it, especially on this project for things like the straps or the helmet even, or any sort of detail, like even the tongue, I believe, was using dynamic thickness. So there we go. There's the headgear. And I'm going to commit and apply my subdivisions. The reason being is that it'll give me a much more accurate curve with many more points to create that IMM along. And there I go, frame mesh. And here is a custom stitch brush that I've inserted. So it's very nice. And it came out very, very cool. A little bit of attention to detail there goes a long way. And those are some of the buttons that I made and snaps. So now I'm going to show you guys the final posed models with all of their final materials and textures before we go to rendering. And you got to think from where we started from to here was a very short process. And it all started with the help of 3D AI Studio, giving us the blocking mesh, giving us all the proportions that we could play with. And it very much was an assistive tool in this process. And here's the final rendering that we did. And I really want to thank you guys all for joining me on this tutorial. I'll see you in the next one.